Good afternoon, my darlings. It is Thursday, the 2nd of May, and the beginning of Mayhem. Well, it's still the beginning, because it's only the second day in. And today I am bringing you I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Now, think about Richard Matheson. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have had Stephen King, Dean Koontz, James Herbert, Richard Lehman, to name but a few. So, without further ado, let's continue, because this is your treat for this afternoon, my darlings. Now, when this was originally written, it was in 1954, so quite a way back. And the copy that I have here is by Galanzik, and it's been printed in Great Britain in 2006. So this book is 18 years old, because I bought it back in 2006. It is dedicated to Henry Kuttner, with my grateful thanks for his help and encouragement on this book. I shall read you the blurb on the back. It's an introduction by Stephen King. Yeah, the most clever and riveting vampire novel since Dracula. That was Dean Koontz. And then the narrative goes, Robert Neville is the last man left alive on Earth, but he is not alone. Every other man, woman and child on the planet has become a vampire. Neville spends his days scavenging for food and supplies and hunting down the undead in their lairs, in the ruins of civilization. At night, he becomes the hunted and barricades himself in his home, waiting and praying for the dawn. I Am Legend is one of the first and certainly the most brilliant fusion of horror and science fiction. Its powerful and disturbing rework of the vampire myth has made it a classic and enduring novel that has profound impact on a generation of writers. The very peak of all paranoid science fiction, the encyclopedia of science fiction, an inspiration to me, Stephen King, a thoughtful, meditative exploration of solitude and despair, scary, thrilling, tragic, witty, and ultimately uplifting. James Lovegrove. And it cost me $7.99 when I bought it. And it's $7.99 well spent. Absolutely. The introduction by Stephen King. To say that Richard Matheson invented the horror story would be as ridiculous as it would be to say that Elvis Presley invented rock and roll. What the purist would scream about Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Stick McGee, the Robins, and a dozen others. The same is true of the horror genre, which is the equivalent of rock and roll, and it is, isn't it? Yeah. So it's a quick hit to the head that bobs your nerves and makes hurt so good. Before Matheson came dozens, going back to the author of the Grendel story, and Mary Shelley, and Horace Walpole, and Edgar Allan Poe, and Bram Stoker, and H.P. Lovecraft, and on and on and on, which is what I was saying. Without him, there wouldn't be Stephen King. Without the other writers, we wouldn't have had Richard Matheson. Each one feeds the other. The legends that we read when we are younger, we transfer and create our own monsters. Sometimes we embellish upon the past. Sometimes we go straight for it and go to the future. Either way, writing evolves like music evolves. And that's what Stephen is getting at. In the early 1950s, when Weird Tales... Oh, who doesn't like a little bit of Weird Tales? If you haven't indulged, I suggest you do, because Weird Tales, well, says it in the title, weird. Yeah, Robert Bloch, horror's greatest writer at the time, had turned to psychological tales, and at this time, Fritz Leiber, easily Bloch's equal, had fallen oddly silent for a time. Well, each one has a breather, the other one takes the mantle and keeps going. Absolutely. The genre of horror was languishing in the hoarse latitudes. Richard Matheson came like a bolt of pure ozone lightning. Oh boy, did he do so, and so well. I really do like Richard Matheson. He goes for the jugular. And I don't mean that to sound ridiculous because it's vampires. We don't call him Dracula, we call him Jugular. Sorry, private joke. He single-handedly regenerated a stagnant genre. Oh yes, he did. Rejecting the conventions of the pulps which were already dying, and incorporating sexual impulses and images into his work, as Theodore Sturgeon had already begun to do in his science fiction and writing series of gut bucket stories that were like shots of white lightning. What do I remember about those stories? This is from Stephen. I remember what they taught me. The same thing rock's most recent regenerator, Bruce Springsteen, articulates in one of his songs, No Retreat Baby, No Surrender. I remember that Matheson would never give ground. No, he doesn't. He takes no prisoners. When you thought it had to be over, that your nerves couldn't stand any more, that was when Matheson turned it on. Oh yes, onto the afterburners, and went into overdrive. He would not quit. He was relentless. The baroque innotations of Lovecraft, the perfid prose of the pulp, the sexual innuendos were all absent. You were faced with so much pure drive that only rereadings showed Matheson's wit, cleverness and control. When people talk about genre, I guess they mention my name first. But without Richard Matheson, I wouldn't be around. He is as much my father as Bessie Smith was Elvis Presley's mother. He came when he was needed, and his stories hold all their original hypnotic appeal. Be warned, you are in the hands of a writer who asks no quarter and gives none. No, he will wring you dry. Oh yes, he will. And when you close this volume, he will leave you with the greatest gift a writer can ever give you. He will leave you wanting more, and you will never, ever be satisfied. You will always want more, Richard. Give me more, Richard. I need more horror. Ooh, and he is. I'm sorry to steal your title, Mr. King, but Richard Matheson really is the king of horror. Oh yes, and you're very true to say, without him, there wouldn't have been you. I Am Legend. Utterly terrifying. It will get under your skin and rattle your nerve endings like never before. You think that you're safe, then think again. Now this is, my children, is what nightmares are made out of. Part 1, January 1976. Yeah. On those cloudy days, Robert Neville was never sure when sunset came. Imagine being the one thing that's going to save your ass is knowing what time sunset is. Quite literally. If he had been more analytical, he might have calculated the approximate time of their arrival, but he still used the lifetime habit of judging nightfall by the sky, and on cloudy days that method did not work. That was why he chose to stay near the house on those days. He walked around the house in a dull grey of afternoon, a cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth, trailing thread-like smoke over his shoulder. He checked each window to see if any of the boards had been loosened after violent attacks. The planks were often split or partially pried off, and he had to replace them completely. A job he hated. Today, only one plank was loose. Isn't that amazing, he thought. In the backyard, he checked the hothouse and the water tank. Sometimes the structure around the tank might be weakened or its rain catchers bent or broken off. Sometimes they would lob rocks over the high fence around the hothouse, and occasionally they would tear through the overhead net. He'd have to replace panes. Both the tank and the hothouse were undamaged today. He went to the house for a hammer and for some nails. As he pushed open the front door, he looked at the distorted reflection of himself in the cracked mirror. He'd fastened to the door a month ago. In a few days, jagged pieces of the silver-black glass would start to fall off. Let 'em fall, he thought. It was the last damn mirror he'd put there. It wasn't worth it. He'd put garlic there instead. Garlic always worked. He passed slowly through the dim silence of the living room, turned left into the small hallway, and left again into his bedroom. Once the room had been warmly decorated, but that was in another time. Now it was a room entirely functional, and since Neville's bed and bureau took up so little space, he had converted one side of the room into a shop. A long bench covered almost an entire wall. On its hardwood top, a heavy bandsaw, a wood lathe, an emery wheel, and a vice. Above it, on the wall, were haphazard racks of the tools that Robert Neville used. He took a hammer from the bench and picked out a few nails from one of the disordered bins. Then he went back outside and nailed the plank fast to the shutter. The unused nails he threw into the rubble next door. For a while he stood on the front lawn, looking up and down the silent length of Cimarron Street. He was a tall man, 36, born of English-German stock. His features undistinguished except for the long, determined mouth and the bright blue of his eyes, which now moved over the charred ruins of the houses on each side of his. He'd burned them down to prevent them from jumping onto his roof from the adjacent ones. This poor man is living through a living hell. The descriptions that I'm giving you of his surroundings, how he's having to live, it's basically no better than an animal. But he's had to become an animal to fight the animals. After a few minutes he took a long, slow breath and went back into the house. He tossed the hammer on the living room couch and then lit another cigarette and had his mid-morning drink. Well, if I wasn't on cigarettes, drink and probably God knows what at this point, I think I'd be doing pretty well. I don't begrudge the man having a mid-morning drink. Christ, he could drink all day if he wanted to. However, when survival's the goal, it's into the spider hole. Later, he forced himself into the kitchen to grind up the 5-day accumulation of garbage in the sink. He knew he should burn up the paper plates and utensils too, and dust the furniture and wash out the sinks and the bathtub and the toilet, and change the sheets and pillowcases on his bed. But he just didn't feel like it. Well, oh my goodness, some days I don't feel like cleaning the house, although I don't think I've ever let it get as bad as this. However, I'm not living through the apocalypse, and this poor dear man is, so you can forgive him for not having had Clean Bed Friday. It was almost noon. Robert Neville was in the hothouse collecting a basket full of garlic. In the beginning it had made him sick to smell garlic in such quantity. His stomach had been in a state of constant turmoil. That'll be the nerves, son. That'll be the nerves. Now the smell was in his house and in his clothes, and sometimes he thought it was even in his flesh. He hardly noticed it at all. When he had enough bulbs, he went back to the house and dumped them on the draining board of the sink. As he flicked the wall switch, the light flickered, then flared into normal brilliance. A disgusted hiss patched his clenched teeth. The generator was at it again. He'd have to get out of that damned manual again and check the wiring. And if there were too much trouble to repair, he'd have to install a new generator. Angrily, he jerked the legged stool to the sink, got a knife and sat down with an exhausted grunt. So, and that's all I'm going to read you as well, because I don't want to spoil it for you. But that's a very small section of chapter 1. So yeah, Robert Neville, this poor man is living through a living hell. He's living with the living dead, and they only come out at night, and there isn't Avon calling. How? Not just how, but Richard shows us the true meaning of humanity in this book, because he is the last of his kind, is Richard Neville, Dr. Richard Neville. And no, Richard Neville. I'm calling him Richard, I'm calling him Richard Matheson. Robert Neville. Do beg your pardon. That's why I went back to check the book. Robert Neville is the last of his kind. There won't be any more because he hasn't got a mating partner. No, he is the last of mankind, and it's dawning on him that a new era and a new age has come along. Now, I'd like to skip forward just a little bit and talk about another book that came out not so long ago, and it was called The Girl with All the Gifts. Now, I'll tell you who wrote it in a minute. M.R. Carey. Yeah, The Girl with All the Gifts. Now, she, if you don't know the story behind that, there's a virus in this that turns everyone into vampires. Yeah, and it's the same with The Girl with All the Gifts. Yeah, that is also a virus that turns everybody into zombies, if you like, not vampires in that, but zombies. But they are like zombie vampires in this one, but more akin to vampires in this, and it's more the zombies in the other. But they both start off with a virus, and it starts off with us humans becoming the endangered species, and these people becoming the next to inherit the earth. Although it does make you wonder how long that they would be able to survive, because their entire food source, what are they going to eat? What are they going to feed off? Because a vampire needs fresh blood, and if everybody on the planet is now a vampire, there's no food, and therefore their time on the planet will be short-lived unless somehow they feed off each other. And it's the same with the girl with all the gifts. You know, as much as these stories enthrall us and terrify us that it's the end of us and the beginning of them, they're not going to live that long, because there isn't enough food for them to live that long, even though they're the next dominant species. So that's why it's science fiction, and that's why it's short-lived. Think of 28 Days Later, right? Yeah, and I'm going to tell you who wrote that one. 28 Days. Well, it was directed by Danny Boyle, and Alex Garland wrote it. Yeah, Alex Garland, right? Yeah, okay. Ex Machina Annihilation. Yeah, Alex Garland's got an awful lot of experience also in writing about viruses and zombies and them becoming the dominant race and we're becoming the minority. Again, problems. Their food source. When everybody's turned, are they going to eat each other, or are they going to starve and die out? And you see, that's what Richard Matheson goes through with Robert Neville. Robert is trying to survive and when he dies, that's it, the end. And it's such an insightful way into the apocalypse, into survival, into being a prepper, you know, a survivalist. What is he surviving for? He's got no one he can protect other than himself. And is he trying to preserve the last of mankind's achievements through him? Let's think. Childhood's End by oh crikey, I've forgotten his name. Arthur C. Clarke. Yes, Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. When the aliens come back and they're taking everything off the earth, you know, the blue whale, bats, every animal you can imagine, and they take one last human, and well, actually he stows away on board because he wants to know what's going on and why they're taking all the animals and why Earth is dying. And they're stripping the earth of everything, all the artwork, you name it, that whatever is worth taking, the aliens are taking. And he decides when he wakes up on the spaceship that he wants to go back down to Earth to do a last report for them on what he sees on the Earth, because he's a zoologist. He's a scientist, is this young lad. And So he goes back onto Earth to just describe the Earth as it's dying. And I feel that Robert Neville, Richard Matheson's character, he is our last link to the Earth that we knew. And he's telling us, the reader, that the Earth is dying. And there's nothing he can do other than document the dyingness of the planet. And it's heartbreaking. It's soul destroying. It's absolutely terrifying that we are finally witnessing the end of us. And I find that really upsetting, knowing that we have been quite a dominant species on this planet. We have created art and music and medicine, and we've been to the moon, and we're exploring our solar system, and we've created so many wonderful inventions, and we can't stop ourselves from dying. We can't stop the virus from spreading. We can't stop the march of the death that's coming inextricably closer and closer every single day. And it's that grips. It's that holds you in your heart. And although it tries to comfort and soften the blow, it can't stop what's coming, which ultimately is your own death. And in a way, Robert Neville's trying to comfort you, to explain to you that your death, although it's coming, it's not the worst thing that could happen to you. In fact, it will be a release. The worst thing that could happen to you is have to daily live with these creatures, wanting to escape from them and knowing full well that he can't, and he doesn't have the courage to kill himself, and therefore he must endure day after day, night after night, the consequences of his actions and the actions of mankind, of what was mankind that is no longer mankind. And that's what Richard Matheson has put in this book so beautifully. He is the legend. Robert Neville is the legend. He will be the legend that the new species, that will only be a species for a short time, will speak of. They will say, there was this one man who fought against the dying of the light to survive against all odds because he was terrified of death. But when death came, he welcomed it. Yeah, I think you should give I Am Legend a go. I think you will enjoy it. It is a classic. But then again, it's a Richard Matheson, and it's going to be brilliant. 10 out of 10 for a vampire novel. And just think of all the other people that Richard has, influenced and taken care of and nurtured and encouraged to become a better writer than he was. Although Mr. Stephen King, I appreciate that you are humble enough to recognise a master when you meet one. Yes. I'm so glad. I'd love to meet Stephen King. He intrigues me. That man's mind, oh goodness me, it's marvellous. And I would just If I had the opportunity, I would love to meet Stephen King, and I'd love to talk to him about Richard Matheson, of all things, as well as his own achievements. But yeah, I'd like you to give I Am Legend a go. I don't think I did this book justice in Hacklit Calendar, which is why I've wanted to sit down today to talk to you about I Am Legend, because it is a book that gets under your skin. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it makes you question your own humanity, and it helps you to understand what's ultimately waiting for all of us, our own deaths. Happy readings, darlings, and enjoy!